It's
college?
not, yeah, you work for the college, but it's not restricted to students. Did that, for more than a decade. And she's graduating.
Here we are in our semicircle again, a circle of vision and reflection, sometimes a forum for deciding and empowering. Here we are at the base of another bridge, another space spanning the shores of today and tomorrow, beckoning us to cross the chasm one day at a time. Here we are gathered again at the cusp of the future, at the boundary that holds community together. We are here in a circle of love and trust, brought to this moment by a series of choices and promises, by hope and gratitude, by our own shadows, faced and befriended. With a servant's heart, with a leader's listening, with a parent's love, truer than all inner trembling, let us model the health we seek for all and lean into community. Somewhere out there, all we dream is possible. Somewhere in here, we are sowing the seeds. At this time, we have an opportunity to light our candles of community. You can light a candle for a joy or a concern, or simply to bring more light into our space.
We are gathered in the Spirit, our bodies are all hearts, filled with joy and touched with wonder, separate hands, not mingled hearts, giving thanks and singing praises for the love that calls us on from our many different places. We are gathered into one. We are gathered in our sorrow. We are gathered in our fear, in our pain and in our worry, in our anger and our tears, as we tend to one another with our gifts and with our care. Our community is strengthened through the faith and hope we share. We are gathered in commitment to a planet that is whole. Works of justice, acts of kindness, bless the world and heal our souls. As our voices join together, may our song of peace resound. May we offer in abundance all the grace that we have found.
Let us stand together in body or spirit for our chalice lighting and our spoken affirmation. We face a challenge to democracy, a challenge that calls us to hope in moments of despair, a challenge that asks us to persist in the faith that we can and must make a difference. May our flaming chalice recommit us to truth in our words and our actions, that we may live as we believe people should live. Let us join together in the spoken affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. You may be seated. Our opening thought comes from Reinhold Niebuhr, from the essential Reinhold Niebuhr selected essays and addresses. Niebuhr writes, "Our capacity for justice makes democracy possible, but our inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary."
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and fathers of time, daughters of dust and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love, lovers of life. We are the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace. We are the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and fathers of time, daughters of dust and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy, brothers of love, lovers of life. We are the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace. We are the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers. We are our grandfather's dreamings, and we are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are one. 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 We are one.
Our next reading comes from Carl Sagan in his work, The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. Sagan writes, "If we can't think for ourselves, if we're unwilling to question authority, then we're just putty in the hands of those in power. But if the citizens are educated and form their own opinions, then those in power work for us. In every country, we should be teaching our children the scientific method and the reasons for a Bill of Rights. With it comes a certain decency, humility, and community spirit. In the demon-haunted world that we inhabit by virtue of being human, this may be all that stands between us and the enveloping darkness. Let us prepare our hearts and minds for a time of meditation. We'll be hearing the words from Leslie Takahashi, to right the wrongs of our kin. Let us begin by breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. Spirit of life and love, hear this cry which begins with gratitude for the human ability to take action to right the wrongs of our kin. If you are the force of love, be loving to these dear ones who would rid the world of hatred and greed. If you are the force of possibility, seed opportunity for those who believe they are forgotten. If you are a larger freedom, break the chains of oppression and ignorance in which so many lives are bound. If you are the power of healing, please, oh please, bring comfort to the little ones who are imprisoned away from their sources of comfort and care. Whatever you are, any force of the more which allows us to reach beyond this reality to a more inclusive and loving presence, give energy to these precious ones who would make a difference. And may their actions inspire all of us to do whatever is in our power to make it known that we will not allow our neighbors to be treated as less than human. Our next reading comes from Wendell Berry from The Art of the Commonplace, the Agrarian Essays Justice Collective. Wendell Berry writes, "The great enemy of freedom is the alignment of political power with wealth. This alignment destroys the commonwealth, that is, the natural wealth of localities and the local economies of household, neighborhood, and community, and so destroys democracy, of which the Commonwealth is the foundation and practical means."
We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive in this great turning. We shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive in this great turning. We shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love.
For our discourse this morning, I'm continuing our reflections on the 8 principles. Today we're looking at the 5th principle, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. I'll begin with another reading. This reading is from Reverend Parissa Parsa, who's reflecting on the 5th principle. In our religious lives, the democratic process requires trust in the development of each individual conscience, a belief that such development is possible for each of us, as well as a commitment to cultivate our own conscience. We could call it a commitment to the value of each person. In the words of Theodore Parker, democracy means not, quote, "I am as good as you are," end quote, but, quote, "you are as good as I am," end quote. My connection with the sacred is only as precious as my willingness to acknowledge the same connection in others. This comes from the 7 Principles in Word and Worship, edited by Ellen Brandenburg. So the evidence is overwhelming that communities with vibrant, participatory, democratic processes in which the value and the conscience of all persons are respected, the evidence is overwhelming that those democratic communities are the most just, the most peaceful, the most flourishing, and the most sustainable communities in the world. How can then UUs model the importance of the right of conscience and participatory democracy in our society when so many persons seem drawn to autocratic leaders and practices? When we look to see, both historically and in our contemporary world, where and who the haters of democracy are, we find that they are typically persons of wealth and persons of power who want to control the political landscape to maintain and expand their wealth and their power. As most of you know, I teach philosophy at Oklahoma City University, and in my teaching of philosophy and in my reading of philosophy, I get to read a lot of Plato and Aristotle. And while there is much in Plato and in Aristotle that I appreciate, the more I read Plato and Aristotle, the more I am struck by how their positions of power and privilege influence their philosophies, especially when it comes to their political views and their criticisms of democracy. If you've read Plato or Aristotle, you know that they are not fans of democracy. Plato believed that a monarchy was the best form of government, and conveniently for him as a philosopher, he believed that only philosophers should be kings, because only philosophers had access to true wisdom and to knowledge of the eternal forms of goodness and justice that one needs to rule in a society. Aristotle, in a similar way, a little bit different, but Aristotle argued that only persons who have leisure time to cultivate both moral virtues and intellectual virtues should participate directly in the political process, thus precluding the political participation of the vast majority of persons in the society of his time. Their positions of power, their positions of privilege, leads them to a kind of elitism that tends to lead them to reject democracy as being a good form of government. Unfortunately, Plato's and Aristotle's anti-democratic perspectives get carried over into Christian political thought, owing to Plato's and Aristotle's influence on two of the most influential Christian theologians in the history of Christian thought, Augustine and Aquinas, respectively. Augustine, who lived from 354 to 430 CE, not too long after Christianity became an acceptable religion in the Roman Empire under Constantine, and during Augustine's life, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire under the Emperor Theodosius. And then Thomas Aquinas, who lived from 1225 to 1274, Augustine and Aquinas were two of the most influential apologists for the church's acceptance of the autocracy of empire. They were the two most influential apologists for the church's acceptance of the autocracy of empire. And they used the philosophical framework of Plato through Plotinus, someone who followed Plato's perspectives in the case of Augustine. So Augustine learned about Plato not directly from Plato, but through the Neoplatonic philosopher Plotinus. And then in the case of Aquinas, he was, for the most part, influenced by Aristotle. And so both Plato and Aristotle influenced Augustine and Aquinas in their case for the acceptance of autocracy over democracy. And eventually, this gets expressed in things like the divine right of kings and the emphasis on the importance of following the will and the dictates of the king in order to be a faithful Christian in the world. Now, even though Christianity was compromised by autocracy before Augustine was born and long before Aquinas was born, even though Christianity accepted autocratic forms of leadership before Augustine and Aquinas were around, the anti-democratic influence of Plato and Aristotle on Augustine and Aquinas still plays a role in developing and perpetuating Christian political thought that is supportive of autocracy. Now, don't want to pick on Christianity alone. There are forms of autocratic thinking in other world religions, and religious nationalism based in other world religions also ends up leading to supporting autocratic political structures as well. But in our society, the fact that Christian political thought is supportive of autocracy and autocratic movements is more germane to our particular situation. And it shouldn't come as a surprise that many of the autocratic movements in the West have been cloaked in Christian language. They've been cloaked in Christian thought that is supportive of autocracy. If you look today at the primary drivers of failed democracies in our world, I would put them into three categories. The three primary drivers of failed democracies are, one, echoing Wendell Berry here, the infusion of money into the political process, which gives the wealthy disproportionate power and influence. First driver. Second driver, the belief that some persons or groups of persons are of less value than some other persons or groups of persons. And then three, the third driver, is the diminished economic and educational opportunities for significant portions of the population, which have come about owing to one and two, the infusion of money into politics and the belief that some persons are of less value than other persons. More simply put, autocrats make use of their wealth and power to gain, maintain, and expand their power while using things like religion and race. Using religion and race to divide people, to pit people against one another as a way of distracting them from the real reasons why they are experiencing diminishing economic opportunities and diminishing political influence. By getting us to point the finger of blame in relation to our problems at one another, the autocrats are successful in fully consolidating their own wealth and power within society. This is not true freedom. This is not a kind of freedom that will endure. And though it may be disguised sometimes as democracy, oftentimes what we think is a vibrant, full democracy is not really a full and vibrant democracy. It's something closer to oligarchy. So even though it's often disguised as democracy, this is actually what oligarchy looks like. The control of the wealthy, the control of the powerful of our political processes. If you look at history, if you look throughout history and even up to this very day, there are those who are arguing against democracy, usually because they're wanting to protect their power and wealth, but they put forward other arguments against democracy besides that. They say things like, democracy is not the best form of government for us because many persons are not educated enough to participate responsibly in the democratic processes. You've probably heard people say that before. I don't want, quote, those people voting. They're not, quote, educated enough to make responsible political choices. They're not educated enough to vote. That excuse that was used for years to keep the most vulnerable persons within our communities from voting. This issue of education, though, is not a problem with democracy. It's a problem of cultivating the societal will to create systems by which all persons have equitable access to the education that would help us make responsible political choices. Today, many who make this lack of education of the masses argument against democracy are the very same persons who are creating barriers for the equitable access to high-quality public education. A society that gives up on public education, a society that gives up on a high-quality public education, is a society that is giving up on democracy. Often those who call out the loudest for freedom, you've heard a lot of people call out loud for freedom and more freedom in our society. Often those who call out the loudest for freedom are the least willing to protect the conditions that will allow true and enduring freedom to exist in a society. You cannot have real freedom without freedom of conscience, without protecting the right of conscience. And you cannot have freedom of conscience without freedom of religion, or, in some cases, freedom from religion. And you cannot have freedom of religion or freedom of religious expression without separation of church and state, which includes not doing anything to establish one religion as the religion of the state. Thus, those who call for freedom, while also calling for us to be a Christian nation, are actually undermining the most important conditions for freedom in our society. Christian nationalism and true and enduring freedom are contradictory propositions. A vibrant and enduring democracy is not possible in a society that does not protect the freedom of conscience to orient oneself to religion as one sees fit, as long as such religious orientation is not expressed in ways that harm others. The case for the right of conscience, the case for the freedom of conscience expressed through democracy is a strong one. Throughout the world, the evidence shows us that there is a clear correlation between vibrant democracy and human flourishing and also ecological flourishing. Vibrant, full democracies are demonstrably happier, healthier, better educated, less corrupt, more equitable, more participatory, more just, and yes, even more peaceful than flawed democracies, and also societies with autocratic forms of government. While it is true that not everyone gets exactly what they want within a democracy, that's true. That's kind of life, isn't it? It is much more likely that we will get what we need to flourish as persons within a community where each person's freedom of conscience is respected and persons are empowered to express themselves as persons of equal value within the democratic process. In other words, in a democracy, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you'll find you get what you need, or something like that. Famous 20th century philosopher, I think, said that, right? Respecting the freedom of others and treating each other as persons with equal and inherent worth. That is what true and enduring freedom looks like. When Unitarian Universalists affirm the right of conscience and the use of the right of conscience and the use of democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, we are affirming a right and a process that helps us all make progress together towards a more beloved community. May we make it so. At this time, we have an opportunity to give freely according to your conscience. And there's opportunity to give at the table and also opportunities to give online.
We gather together in joyful thanksgiving, acclaiming creation whose bounty we share. Both sorrow and gladness we find now in our living. We sing a hymn of praise to the life that we bear. We gather together to join in the journey, confirming, committing our passage to be a true affirmation in joy and tribulation, when bound to human care and hope, then we are free.
Our world is one world. What touches one affects us all. The seas that wash us round about, the clouds that cover us, the rains that fall. Our world is one world. The thoughts we think affect us all. The way we build our attitudes with love or hate we make a bridge or wall. who stand or fall. Our world is one world, just like a ship that bears us all, where fear and greed make many holes, but where our hearts can hear a different call.
Let us stand in body or spirit for our closing thought and the extinguishing of the chalice. Our closing thought comes from Willy Brandt, speech from 1987. Brandt says, "If I am to say what, besides peace, is more important to me than anything else, my unconditional answer is freedom. Freedom for the many, not merely for a few. Freedom of conscience and of opinion, and also freedom from poverty and fear." Let us join in extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.